Hello, I'm Byron Stripling, and I want you to join me right here at the Lincoln Theater on February 19th and 20th as a jazz arts group, WOSU, and the National Endowment of the Arts celebrates the music of Louis Armstrong and the Hot 5 and 7 bands. But when I say Louis Armstrong, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Hello, Dolly? What a Wonderful World? Mac the Knife? Or maybe Kiss to Build a Dream On? Or maybe it's that keyboard smile mopped up with a white handkerchief? Or the sound of a golden trumpet? Or maybe it's that gravelly voice. Oh, yeah! Well, these sounds and images are all a huge part of the cultural icon that we call Louis Armstrong. But the exciting thing is that there's even more. On February 19th and 20th, we will celebrate what some critics and historians consider the hallmark of Louis Armstrong's recording career, the Hot 5 and Hot 7 bands. Now, I'll be honest, if you're like most folks, you're probably saying, what's the Hot 5 and Hot 7 bands? And I know that's probably how you guys talk, too. Well, I answer this by telling you my own story. You know, when I was a kid, I had this album called Louis Armstrong's Greatest Hits. And on there was those same songs I was talking about, Hello, Dolly, What a Wonderful World, and so many others. And I thought that that was all that was to Louis Armstrong. But the older musicians, my friends, they kept talking about a period of Louis Armstrong that I wasn't familiar with. And they would mention songs like Big Butt and Eggman and West End Blues, Potato Head Blues, I'm Not Rough, and so many others. And so I went and I got some of those recordings. These were recordings that I wasn't familiar with, and they were from the 1920s. I picked them up, and I put them on my record player, and I got to be honest, the moment I heard them, I hated them. I did. I couldn't stand them. I mean, the sound was scratchy. I couldn't hear the drums. Louis sounded like he had a sock in his trumpet, and the fidelity was horrible. And that's when I found out something real special. First, great art doesn't have an expiration date. But more than that, music that was recorded in the 1920s sounds like music that was recorded in the 1920s. See, sometimes the music lover has to lean in and become an active participant to the listening process. And it's with this kind of attention that the listener gets an even higher reward from the artist. And here's something else I learned from those early recordings. Hello, Dolly, and the other commercial hits, that was just a part of his genius. See, the Hot 5 and Hot 7 recordings were like an artistic download of all the sounds, the feelings, the experiences of New Orleans. Armstrong was bathing his ears in the sounds of the brass bands like the Eagle, the Olympia, the Tuxedo brass bands. And these were bands that played for parades and funerals and even provided music for parties and dances. And then there was the music of the sanctified church, where Louis heard the folks sing and shout and praise God in their own way. And how about the sounds from Congo Square? These are when dancers would gather and dance a special dance. These were former slaves, and they would dance a dance called the Bambula. And people were amazed at what they saw from that. Then, of course, there were what Louis Armstrong called the rag, bottle, and bones men. And these were guys who played these little tin horns, and they could even play the blues on that. See, if you lived back in New Orleans and you were the Iceman or the Milkman, you had to have a way of drawing attention to yourself. You didn't have a 30-second commercial on the Super Bowl. You had to do something special. So maybe you had a horn or a song that you could sing, and that would attract people's attention. And it attracted Armstrong's attention. And, of course, there were those New Orleans nightclubs. Lulu White's Mahogany Hall. The Funky Butt. Louis always remembered that the chicks in the Funky Butt would get way down and shake everything. These were bordellos, brothels, houses of ill repute, full-service entertainment centers. Yeah, they were whorehouses. And by the way, this is where jazz got its sort of negative reputation, because this is where dancers would dance while the musicians, the jazz musicians, played, and they would seduce their customers. Well, people didn't want their kids playing this music, hearing this music, seeing this music. So that's where jazz got this reputation as the devil's music. But for Louis, These houses, they were the place where he met those characters that were so important to his life. People like Black Benny, who everybody in New Orleans knew. He played bass drum in a brass band, but he was the one who taught Louis how to deal with women, even though he was actually shot himself by a jealous lover. And of course, there was Jelly Roll Morton, who along with Sidney Bechet were the two real kings of New Orleans. And Jelly Roll was so famous for that gold tooth that he had in his mouth. And he used to say he invented jazz, which of course we know wasn't quite true, but we do know that what he did for the history of jazz was so important. Of course, the group of people that had the most and meant the most to Louis Armstrong were the great cornet men. People like Buddy Bolden, who they said you could hear his sound clear across the river. Buddy Pettit, Bunk Johnson, Freddie Keppert, who took a white handkerchief and he would cover the valves so people couldn't copy him. And they offered to record him, but he refused to be recorded because he didn't want people stealing his stuff. And of course, most important of all of the New Orleans cornet men was the great Joe King Oliver, who Louis Armstrong acknowledged as his mentor and teacher. And King Oliver was a big, imposing man who was blind in one eye. But he had a way of playing a gut bucket blues that was really a way of talking through his horn. Well, it's these sounds, it's these people, it's these musical experiences that inspire the Hot 5 and Hot 7 recordings. And it's within these recordings that we witness Louis's nod to the past and his musical prediction to the future. And now the pale moon shining on the fields below, the folks are crooning soft and low. You didn't tell me, boy, because I know, yeah. Now when it's sleepy time down south. See, in the 1920s, whenever Louis Armstrong's lips touched his mouthpiece, a transformation took place in music. The Hot 5 and Hot 7 recordings represent this transformation, a glorious beginning of jazz. Through them, we see the evolution of the greatest jazz musician who ever lived, a man who inspired us all. You know, the famous Duke Ellington cornetist Rex Stewart once said, "I was one of his ardent admirers. I tried to walk like him, talk like him. I bought shoes and a suit like the great one wore." Well, he inspired me too. I wanted to be just like him. I remember as a kid, I wanted to have a scar on my lip just like him. I did everything but cut my lip so I could have one of those scars. His music was so powerful. Yet, I never met him. I never saw him perform. But his music reached out of the speaker and grabbed my ears and took me on a musical journey that changed my life. He was the American dream, born in the poverty of the streets of New Orleans. You know, according to the conventional wisdom, Louis Armstrong was supposed to be somewhere scrubbing somebody's steps or shining somebody's shoes. But he said, "Oh no, I've got better things on my mind." And he went deep within and showed us the power of music, showed us how we could change people, change people's lives with a song and with a smile. Well, I hope you'll join us as we celebrate this great man and this great music. February 19th and 20th at the Lincoln Theater. Till the break of day, yeah. That dear old Southland with its dreamy songs. Yeah, take me back where I belong. Right in my mammy's arms. Ba-da zat did le do de do bobo do to zat da da zat billy to zat. Whoa, good evening, everybody.